The great city of Cleveland has had its fair share of disaster. Certain accounts have greatly affected the citizens of this community. Our group has chosen to divulge into some of the more prolific cases of deviant behavior here in our very own city. I'm sure there are accounts dating prior to the 1930s, but I have chosen to start with the infamous murder mystery of Cleveland, the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, also known as the Torso Killer. In the years prior to this tragedy, Cleveland had greatly prospered. Migration and the Industrial Revolution grew Cuyahoga County's population to an excess of 1 million. Once the Great Depression had hit, many of the citizens lost their jobs, and Cleveland was left with a massive population of indigent people. They began to build shantytowns, forming communities of destitution littered with makeshift homes crammed side by side. One of the most predominant was located in Kingsbury Run and was also said to be a hunting ground for the Torso Killer. The rapid transit ran directly through this area, leaving the more fortunate a chance to view the new reality as they rode into the city for work. If this harsh life wasn't enough, the community of despondency had to also endure the horror of these crimes. For years, our city sat in constant fear as a depraved individual riddled the community with his horrific acts. It started in September of 1934. The lower half of a woman's torso washed up on the Lake Erie shoreline. All evidence pointed toward intentional decapitation. She was never identified, nor was the head found. The Jane Doe was referred to as the Lady of the Lake. This murder went unsolved and was thought to be a single incident. A year later, the body of Edward Andrassy was found at Kingsbury Run. Andrassy was one of the 3 victims identified out of 12 confirmed kills. The body was both decapitated and castrated. Victim number 2 was discovered nearby shortly after. 4 months later, the body pieces of Florence Genevieve Polio was discovered neatly wrapped in newspaper and packed in bushel baskets near a manufacturing building blocks from Kingsbury. In June of 1936, victim 4 was found and coined the Tattoo Man. He is one of 4 victims in which a plaster reproduction of his head was made to show to the public in hopes of getting an identification. 4 death masks were created and are on display currently at the Cleveland Police Museum. September of 1936, the upper half of a man's torso was found in Kingsbury Run. A nearby open sewer was searched by police, causing quite a spectacle as the community looked on. At this point, it had been a year since the brutal murder started, and the police did not seem to be any closer to stopping these gruesome crimes. Political and police scrutiny was in the papers daily, causing more pressure to be put on the case. Recently appointed Safety Director Elliot Ness started to become more involved, leading what turned out to be the biggest police investigation in Cleveland history still to this day. A Cleveland torso clinic was held in which Coroner Pierce led a symposium for surrounding coroners, detectives, and other related professions to discuss information pertaining to these murders in hopes of making a break in the case. The summer of 1937, the Cleveland labor problems had begun to escalate and the National Guard had been sent in to keep order. A guardsman discovered victim number 9 in the Cuyahoga River of the Cleveland Flats. Things came to a head on August 16th when both victim number 11 and 12 were found. Both were located in places in which Elliot Ness could look out of his office window and view. It was said that the murderer was trying to personally taunt the safety director. 2 days later, Ness led 25 officers and detectives into Kingsbury Run with squad cars and fire trucks, systematically raiding the shantytown, both searching for clues and suspects as they fully cleared out this community. After which, firemen doused the area and lit it on fire. Elliot Ness had combated the situation by destroying the killer's hunting ground and one of his disposal sites. And though the murder stopped after the destruction of the Kingsbury shantytown, Ness faced criticism for this choice by the community. Ness's credibility never recovered, and Cleveland continued to hold him responsible for the lack of retribution. One primary suspect, a Dr. Francis E. Sweeney, gained infamy in his self-inflicted assertion of culpability. In the early 1950s, he sent a slew of postcards to Elliot Ness with cryptic and possibly liable implementations. These are currently on display along with an Elliot Ness scrapbook at the Western Reserve Historical Society. Almost 20 years ago, Tri-City's very own Professor Badal published In the Wake of the Butcher. He spent years and countless hours researching and divulging into the Butcher case. He has successfully compiled a riveting construction of events and facts, allowing for a complete representation of what this tragedy did to our seemingly innocent community. Most of my information came directly from his book. This just goes to show that even 8 decades later, our Cleveland community is still being affected by this ordeal. From the local museums to our individual citizens, the butcher continues to impact Cleveland.
Although there are many individuals that have affected Cleveland's crime and community, I have chosen to take a detailed look into Anthony Sowell, also known as the Cleveland Strangler. He was arrested in October of 2009 once the bodies of 11 women were found in his duplex in Cleveland, Ohio. Ann Smith, a psychologist specializing in healthy communications, states that our childhood experiences, which include parents combined with our own personalities, our reaction to siblings and peers, and the context of our lives send us off on a path with a particular set of beliefs and patterns that have a huge impact on our future relationships. This was the case with Anthony. His mother would abuse all the children in the house except Anthony, his sister, and older brother. As he grew up, Anthony, who was 11 at the time, began to rape his 10-year-old niece on an everyday basis. Fast forward to 1978, where he was enlisted in the Marine Corps, served 8 years, and was discharged in 1985. With his return home came the beginning of his delinquent activities. September 1990, he was sentenced to 5 to 15 years in prison after pleading guilty for attempting rape of a woman in his own home in 1989. 2 years later, a woman complained that a foul smell was coming from somewhere in the same neighborhood. This is where the acts that he is known for committing as the Cleveland Strangler begin. November 2008, Barbara Carmichael's daughter's car is found near East 115th Street and Kingsman Road. A month later, a missing person report is filed for the missing daughter. 6 days later, a woman covered in blood runs up to a police car at the same spot as her daughter's car was found and says that Sowell asked if she wanted a drink, and she said no, and then he attacked her. He was arrested but released because the woman refused to talk to detectives. People of the community began at this point to start feeling unsafe and just wanted some answers. It wasn't until after he was released that police began looking for missing Tanya Carmichael. The mother felt the police were ignoring her and taking their sweet time. September 2009, the sheriff deputies surprise check to make sure Sowell lives where he says he does, but they do not enter. A few hours later, Sowell persuades a woman to have a drink in his house with him. He then gets angry with her, chokes, and rapes her until she passes out. She got away by persuading him to give him $50 and not tell police. She did not show up to the interview with detectives, so the case was never followed up with. Less than a month later, on October 2009, an ambulance is sent to Sowell's residence due to a naked woman falling or being thrown out of the second-story window. Again, this woman refuses to speak with detectives about what really went on that day. With all of this happening so close together, you can imagine the unrest in the community. People stayed inside after dark and kept a close eye on their children. Then, the woman from September's attack meets with detectives, and they get an arrest warrant for Sowell. Upon arrival, Sowell is nowhere to be found. However, they find 2 decomposing bodies inside the residence. They then found 3 more in the basement, 2 more in the crawl space, 1 in the basement's dirt floor. Once they arrested him, they found 6 more bodies buried in the backyard. The trial lasted for 2 years before he was sentenced to death on the conviction of 11 counts of aggravated murder. The length of the trial affected the community, who just wanted some closure. Some of the victims' families awaited years to hear what would come of the person who took their loved ones away from them. After the trial, Sowell's house was torn down, as decided by city officials. This shows that the community just wanted to take the eyesore out of their town. Some of the victims' families felt like the police did not fully do their jobs. They told us to go home, and as soon as the drugs were gone, she'll show up, stated Markeisha Carmichael Jacobs, Tonya's daughter. Several of the families filed lawsuits in 2010 and 2011 after the bodies were found, claiming that the Cleveland police and the city prosecutor were negligent and reckless in investigating the December 2008 complaint of Gladys Wade. She claimed that he attempted to kidnap, rob, and rape her, but he was released. All the suits were dismissed because there was not any evidence to state their actions were negligible. This, however, speaks to how the families felt about the protection provided by the police in the community. If the community and the family members felt they were well represented and protected, they would have never filed the suits against them. Sowell's actions affected not only the direct families of the victims, but everyone around them, no matter what age. This was also shown when the 4-year anniversary of when the first bodies were found, the community held a rally. A 9-year-old held a sign in remembrance of Diane Turner, also stating to stop the violence and save our community. That was 4 years after the fact. The community was still in upheaval years after the case was closed, and Sowell was put in prison for life. Today, the acts of Sowell affect the community and the small businesses in the surrounding areas. There is a memorial for the victims on a lot where the murderer's house once stood. The acts that he committed will forever be in the minds of those who reside in the area.
Ariel Castro is one of Cleveland's most famous criminals. Castro was born on July 10, 1960 in Puerto Rico and moved to Cleveland while only a child. In 1992, Castro bought a house on 2207 Seymour Avenue, where he first lived with his wife and kids. In 1996, his wife left and took the kids due to Castro's violent manner. After this, in 2002, the kidnapping started. Michelle Knight was the first victim, then Amanda Berry in 2003, and finally Gina DeJesus in 2004. For each kidnapping, Castro would offer one of the girls a ride home. They would each accept because they were friends with his daughter. Castro would then take them to his house and persuade them to go inside. After that, he would proceed to beat and rape the woman for years until May 6, 2013, when Amanda Berry escaped. Berry was able to squeeze her arm out of a locked door and yell for help while Castro was out of the house. A neighbor named Chris Ramsey came to help open the door and let her out. They then called 911 and Castro was arrested. Castro was sent to prison August 1st with life in prison. However, Castro was found hanging in his cell September 3rd, 2013. The community of Tremont was shocked by this. This neighbor had been holding women in his house for years under their noses. However, Castro's house was planned to be demolished, and during the demolition, Michelle Knight and members of the community came to pray together for those who have not been found. Castro signed the deed to his house in order to prevent him from getting the death sentence. He was seen crying while signing the deed because of the happy memories he had there. One of the residents on the street said that the demolition shows that the monster is in prison and never going to get out. A few years earlier, another criminal case with Anthony Sowell happened. Apparently, police did not make missing persons reports for the victims in that case. However, Mayor Frank Jackson then issued 26 recommendations for how the police department could improve. For example, one of the improvements was a dedicated missing persons unit. And in April 2012, 22 out of the 26 recommendations were implemented. Even so, the police officers were criticized with the Castro case because of how long it took for them to be rescued. This goes to show that the force still needs work, and that cases like Castro's and Sowell's can hopefully be avoided in the future. Cleveland has had its history of deviant behavior, but the community each time has come together and moved past it, and in the end, the community of Cleveland has grown stronger and will keep moving on.